Blessings. Welcome to Tree Life Online Academy right here on YouTube. And this is Traditional Podcast. All glory to the true and living Creator in Yod He Vav He, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, Yeshua HaMashiach. We give thanks. I'm your host, Talaku, the Great Owl. And once again, welcome forward to Traditional Podcast. And we are here on traillife.com as well. So just want to make that very clear as well. So our home for traditional podcasts will be right here at Trail Life Online Academy right here on YouTube. So I just want to welcome our listeners to our podcast officially. You know, this has been a new program I've designed over this year, 2024. And I've started out doing some programs, but this is the first program that I'm going to officially launch Traditional Podcast. And so we are launching on Trail Life Online Academy. I'm also going to be promoting Traditional Podcast on Trail Life Television Network as well too, so that the greater audience can be familiarized with Trail Life Online Academy on YouTube. And we want to be very clear about it. Trail Life Online Academy's central role is education and pedagogy. My pedagogy is rooted in generational, ancestral, descendable gnosis, knowledge. And so nature, right, and best practices of the ancestral way is the fundamental premise of our education scheme, practice, and functionality. So the outline has to do with breathing, eating, and sleeping in sequential order, and that is the educational pedagogy on I Breathe Success paid tutorials, and those will be right here on Trail Life Online Academy. And as a part of satisfying the divine nature of information, we don't just want to give information in the context of through an economic module, because obviously for the years we were on Sealer Media, the information was free. And here now in an economic module specific to pedagogy, we are implementing a paid platform, and you just pay through PayPal for those who are interested in signing up for the course. So in pursuant of our education, drives and objectives, our mission statement definitely alive in the spirit. That is Trail Life motto and mission statement. I would mean alive in the spirit, hallelujah, of the Hamashiach, just to be clear. And so traditional podcast is all about information based in our pedagogy that we feel is missing from mainstream information. And so, this is why we are doing this particular podcast. And so, as this is the first one you're going to be introduced to, I just had to do an introduction and a preamble. Once again, I'm Talaku, the Great Owl. So today on Traditional Podcast, we're going to be talking about hand-me-down clothes. We're going to be talking about textiles and what role textiles play in our identity, in our way of life, and in our purpose. Because over the last year and like about 4 months, I've been immersed in hand sewing and discovering the intricacies of sewing. However, it wasn't my first introduction to sewing as a utility in terms of repairing torn or broken garments, because I inherited that tradition from my mother, who at one point actually had a sewing machine, but I guess there was too many focus at the time for her to, be constantly into sewing. So she never was able to pass that knowledge down in terms of a structural or a formal way. She was also into basket weaving as well too. So anyway, I saw the traditions growing up, and so if you had a garment, what we call yard clothes, and it got a tear at first, if it was torn, your mother would basically mend it. But after your mom would mend it, after a while, you would have to learn to mend it. And I learned pretty early, hallelujah, probably by about 8 years old, hallelujah, how to do the mending myself. And likewise, because she actually insisted, that's how I didn't just actually want it to. Most traditional moms in the Americas, the Atlantean Islands, what we call the Caribbean, most traditional moms, or most moms, especially coming from the older generation, would say to their young black males that they wanted to learn certain skills that were called traditional skills of the women, because it was looked down upon for men to be repairing their clothes or such, even though they were tailors as well as dressmakers. A young boy wouldn't necessarily be encouraged. But my mom wanted us to learn to wash our clothes and cook and do all that. So those things were called more feminine chores, hallelujah. But my mom insisted that we learned, and a lot of moms would, because they said, you know, you weren't guaranteed of a good relationship, hallelujah. So it would be best if you learn to take care of yourself as well. So I learned very early on how to mend my clothes and how to appreciate washing them after she would like throw them off the line for being bad washed. So I kind of developed this appreciation with wearing my clothes and seeing them soiled, because boy was I a child that got involved with nature. And I'm sure a lot of children out there now grown into adults can relate to their upbringing of being so hands-on in the earth. I know some kids were homebound, and that's unfortunate. But when you got out, I'm sure you got out dirty and messy. But I'm sure your mom popped them into the washing machine. But here in Jamaica, in Jamaica, and a lot of the Caribbean and in the South, you would have to learn to wash them yourself. And so for me, the relationship between textiles, which really, if you think about the word textile and the word texture, they're contextual, see, as being the same word. They're from the same root. And so their root origin is touch. It is feeling. Hallelujah. So how textiles feel against your skin, and what sense of feeling being clothed, and how you're clothed translate to your sense of identity and purpose. So when I was able to wash my dirty clothes, seeing that them being dirty and soiled meant that they had less value and I looked less appealing or appropriate. Now, when you wash them, when I was able to like wash them appropriately and they were clean, I got the sense that hey, it's new again, always, hallelujah. But there's a problem because the cuffs around the collar and the sleeves will soil a little bit harder. So you would have to put in a little more effort. And so these character building processes were enshrined in me. So 2024, at the end of 2023 into 2024, I got into sewing for the presence of definitely delivering as a fashion designer. I wanted to machine sew and do all of that. But hand sewing became my modus operandi because the Spirit just came to me and told me, just start where you are. And so I had a pants that had been torn in the seat of the pants, and I said to myself, let me try to sew it up. Or I sew it up, and it tore out. And so because it tore out, and I loved the pants, I didn't want to get rid of it. Everything else was good on the pants. I said to myself, what am I going to do? So when the inspiration came, the Spirit said, you have a piece of fabric, don't you, that you've had for a while? Why not use that fabric and create something interesting and cover that spot? And boy, did it start. And that was a khaki Dockers pants, to be honest. And I just cut up the fabric and started sewing. And boy, did I start a process on a journey that has just awoken my spirit to the point now where I can put together a deep analysis of how textiles really relate to identity, purpose, and sense of belonging, especially as it relates to the hand-me-down clothes. As a young child, I was the last boy amongst my mother's sons, right? I mean, she had two other sons before me, right? Her eldest, and my brother was younger than him, was 6 years older than me, so I was the last boy, and there were three girls. But wherein the boys were concerned, right? I didn't really have the style dynamic in terms of size as my middle brother, right? The one that's 6 years older, but the older one, I had more body type to him, so a lot of his old clothes, hallelujah, would become my hand-me-down clothes. And my first sense of style came from what he wore. He loved bank rubber clocks, and so his bank rubber clocks would become mine when they got warped and he needed to update them and look fresh again. He was the first one out of the home, so I was like the pioneer older son, and he wasn't always at home. He lived sometimes with his grandmom, so he became like the standard bearer. And so I wore his clothes, and I could remember that new clothes meant literally, what I was getting, hallelujah, from him. and the clothes always came clean, so it was like dirty, tattered clothes or clean clothes, but there was sometimes a little different in terms of the size, because we were similar, but I was still a skinny, scrawny kid. He was a slender person when he wasn't that skinny, so sometimes they would look a little bit big. So my first style was wearing these oversized clothes, pardon me, but my shoes size would fit with him, right? So not much difference here. So the shoes would fit properly, and I felt proud, because he was somebody that, he wasn't famous, but he made his mark wherever he went, and people knew, a striking, handsome fellow, and they call him Sleep because boy could he sleep anywhere. I guess he had that kind of a temperament, but he had like an electric personality. To this day, he still does, right? Hallelujah! Like he lights up a room, like he really takes it over. I mean, even more than I do. So my sense of purpose and identity first were carved in terms of deportment and fashion through my big bro. And so I adapted that style. And for a while, even when I went a little bit more sporty, I got my first Adidas equipment when I was in high school from him. And I remember when, those set of Clarks came, Clarks was really popular because when I was wearing Clarks years before, nobody even in Jamaica liked the Clarks. They just make fun of my shoes. And all of a sudden, now I was like 14 years old, 13, hallelujah, years old in high school. And now the bank robbers and all of these Clarks were like, they were like the bomb. And then I got my Adidas equipment, which was also one of his shoes. And, it wasn't school issued, because Jamaica, they have this very colonial deportment, directive where you got to be like some boot camp um, ward of the state or some army native or whatever, army officer style where black shoes, everything had to be. It's just systematic, and they talk about this discipline. It's just control, and it suppresses individuality. Anyhow, I was never gonna play that game because I was wearing bank robbers, which they didn't really like. But if it was black, they would allow it. But they still would look at it if it was too, like the deserts were okay, but bank robbers sometimes look too fancy. But I told them that's all I had. And when I got the Adidas equipment, I wore it, and boy, they always tried to strike me and put me into the line and whatever. But this kind of attitude kind of got me to stand up, hallelujah, for myself and realize that it's stupid. It was really is stupid. Sorry for the bad grammar. Two words got caught, two state of mind got caught. It really was stupid, and it's a stupid state of mind to continue in the present, to judge children based upon their shoes and the color of their shoes and talk about its discipline. No, it's control. It's robotic, mechanical, slave-minded, Slavic control mentality to want to hold our children in an identity that fosters serfdom, wardship, and control of the state over their affairs. It's not about giving credence to the individual life. What a mother or a father has to do to make sure that their child is prepared for public school isn't easy, and we know this all over the world, no matter how we pretend, especially if we're Aboriginal so-called black folks, we know. And so when these systems are holding parents and children to these factory indoctrination, army boot camp style, control doctrine as discipline, it's just quack. I broke that. I cracked that open. Hallelujah. And some might say, well, that's why you're not systematic. And I'll give thanks because that's just control. And it doesn't says anything about ability or competence. It's just a part of the understanding, especially when you look into, the cultural meanings connected to clothing, like how your parents have to really work hard and the schemes they have to go through sometimes, like the khaki, which is the uniforms that we wear out here for the boys mainly. All right, that's how I'm referring to it, and the tunics for the girls in many colors. The essence of it is, pardon me, sometimes it has to be hand me down because there's no other way your parents, hallelujah, can afford it. So if there are bigger brothers, bigger sisters, it's good when they go to the same school. The parents decide when they go to a new school because it's a new set of uniform. But the uniforms can be handed down when it's the same school, and that was a tradition. We all had to go to the same school. It was easier for that process to take place and save your parents and money. But with these new economic modules where government agencies are like that, agencies which are agents of a foreign state, they are not nationalized, they're not under common law, they're not under the law of the land, right? They're under the mercantile law. These are agencies of foreign state for foreign corporation. And so they sold out our rights. So now they're forcing parents now to have it to contract out to get these uniforms and all these things every year now provided through the school. And then they have this branding system about epaulets. And in my time they were telling my parents you could not go and buy the colors and have my tailors or tailors would sew the epaulets on. No, you had to actually go to the school and purchase the school approved epaulets, same color, right? So I sewed mine on, and they were big and odious like the stripe of a general. They didn't like it. I didn't care. And people might say, you're so rebellious. But let me tell you something. A lot of people are comfortable in an identity that is almost unitary and is unitary in expression. Everybody else shares the same identity. And you feel comfortable. That's why we police each other in thought so much. And there's no freedom in mentation, no freedom in thought processes. Here at Traditional Podcast, my very essence in this pedagogy is to remember the generational knowledge, the generationally descendable knowledge that comes down not just through these hand-me-down clothes, but a continuity of values and attitude. And let me be very clear, because of economic migration also too, a lot of people have had to leave their families. And this estranged process causes individuals to live with other family members. And because of this economic migration, because of how the pedagogy is structured, identity gets splintered. You find that people leave from the generational descendable knowledge that they could have learned from their grandfathers and their grandmothers in the communities, right, towards some economic viability. But that was basically thwarted and rendered null and void by the prevailing factory indoctrination system we call the regular education system, which basically teaches you that there's no value basically in your grandparents' knowledge, whether it's farming, building, whatever it is that is of the natural, the generational, the traditional. They make it appear as if the only knowledge that you can get is through the Western indoctrination, which basically is putting upon you an identity that takes you out of something that is heredity, that is generational, it's in your blood, it's in your DNA, to something that you now have to learn, an abstracted state, a state that functions within a mechanism, and that mechanism is called society. And society has several economic modules, and in most economic modules, the labor force in the mechanized consciousness is basically just like a machine, a workhorse. So with preservation of identity, connection to values and attitudes and outcomes are lost, because all that happens because of this socialization, because of this pedagogy, is that you become robotic, a slave, you become a worker, and there's no connection to what you're creating with your heritage, with yourself, with your sense of identity or purpose. The people who had to migrate far away and work hard and send money back to yard, right? The clothing sometimes they would send down in the barrel weren't always new clothing. They went to thrift shops and thrift stores. So it was all the family had. And that form of clothing had to become now descendable from the big Dulcimina grips, right? Those old clothes now become your renewed clothes. There was a lot of thrift drives through church groups and such in America, in the 40s and 50s. A lot of these clothes came to Jamaica, and they were like formal-like clothes, but these were the kind of mentality that we wanted to look our best. And so sometimes the children were going to school looking like they were going to church, church dressing, according to how that European slave mentality socialized us into that it's the most important occasion, not for the sake of Christ, but for the sake of the fact that here's where you are most subtle. You are supposed to be more subservient in the context, hallelujah, of the church. So yes, dress up, yeah, and please your masters. And in a sense, we turn it into a sense of identity building. So now coming out of the colonial view of church being for the abolitionists, the real abolitionists, us, a rallying point, a gathering point, even though they took the drums from us, we had the percussive clapping, that was replacing of the drum sound and the tambourine and such, which is a subdued drum, for those who know. And so all of this generational knowledge now being transposed into a personality that goes to college is learning about Immanuel Kant and Hegelian philosophies and all of this way of thinking, and losing that knowledge of deeper communication with self, with an identity that your generations would have had, your family would have had for lifetimes, right? That is something that we cannot take for granted, because now this is the essential part of your reality that makes you become the character of the personage that you desire. It is rooted in not just a physical design, it is rooted in the principles that cause your generations to work the way they have worked, right? Towards the ends they have worked towards. And this builds purpose. So now this is where you can come back in the commune, back to the community, to want to build the community, to want to be a part of improving the lives of young individuals who 30 years prior didn't have those opportunity, right, in your generation. But now, through you're going out through your economic migration, now you set a way forward. But look at how they reverse it through this kind of, very aggrandizing, decadent material culture, where now, if our family members that live abroad now, that go to work in these, very difficult condition, peligroso, right? And now send any kind of old clothes down. Oh my God, I've seen it on the social media. They lambast them. Any kind of second-hand clothes, used clothes, thrifted clothes, oh, they laugh it to scorn, because the material consciousness has so taken over them. They don't remember how hard those individuals worked in the past, and how that formed a part of a core character of humility, where vanity never took the center stage. That you didn't work just for clothes, you worked to maintain the family, your family. And if all the families are working to maintain each other, they will also work to maintain the community. So that communal value we used to share, that they sing upon and talk about the good old days are gone forever, as if it was only placated to be in the past. It should be a continuous, ongoing state that we should harmonize and work together. I'm not talking fluffy pillow cartons harmonization. I'm talking the kind of experience we had before, where the community raised the children, not a philosophy, but, hallelujah, an actuality in experience. People knew that you were doctor, farmer, teacher, postmaster, son or daughter, teacher's child, the carpenter's child, the shoemaker's son, the dressmaker's daughter, the tailor's son. And people expected through the apprenticeship of that family tradition that you too would come to be a tailor, a dressmaker, a shoemaker, a carpenter, a doctor. They expected that you would follow the family traditions, because this descendable knowledge was how the past generation dealt with the issues. You didn't have to rush out of the community to find a dentist or find someone to deal with your medical ailments. But we've been convinced through the factory indoctrination system that those traditional knowledge is colloquial and are without merit. Hence, we cannot rely upon them. So look at the technical knowledge now in the community. The doctors all go isolated into gated communities of the prison economic plantation economy system. They all get locked up into their gated communities. They're abstracted. This economic module has us only being able to receive remedy in these charge care, for care institution called hospitals, now called hospitals, right? That has nothing hospitable about it. It's just an economic module to benefit from your pain and the fact that you are backed into a corner. So all of that knowledge that had the great healers, teachers, and all of the tradesmen and women in the community accessible, so your children can go apprenticeship with them. Say that your son, who you are a shoemaker, your son don't want to be a shoemaker, he wants to be a tailor, well, he can go apprenticeship with a tailor. We forgot about these systems, and as I'm speaking, I know I'm being judged, but I'm sure some people think that I'm speaking in some form of nostalgia. And you couldn't be more wrong. Hallelujah. Because this is what Share Life Pedagogy is about. So welcome to our educational and economic module that represents restoration of true generational pride, dignity, self-worth, and respect. This knowledge will be descendable and will be transposed to those who need it. So this generational knowledge that was contained, not just in a humble state of mind, but the sense of hands-on skill that every individual within the community had access to. I know when we speak this way, a lot of people love to hear we talk about the farmers, because they are in this delusional state to think farmers were the only traditions that was communal based, hallelujah, and represented the integrated process of community living in our traditional way of life. Because what modern aboriginals reclassified through all these codes have become is an image of their European forebears who looked down upon the original structures that supported the aboriginal cultures that they have destroyed. You destroy the rooting, grounding, and the seed of life within those that you have conquered. Conquest came not just because of our weakness per se, but the way in which we lost value in the things that were generational. Hallelujah. And so in the religious sense, we talk about the loss of traditional knowledge following the ways of the great patriarchs and matriarchs, and also in loss of respect. So we forget that there is deep knowledge. So now for the artistic student who's now going through their thesis work or their final, MFA work, and they're now looking into Aboriginal design structure, and they're looking at the mathematics because they have reached a level now that they can understand the geometric nature of existence in terms of the alphanumerics, and they're now blowing their minds like, oh my God, and some are crying. I'm not mocking anybody, someone like, oh my God. My grandma was trying to teach me this. I didn't want to listen. I just didn't want to know. And right there, within these artwork, these carvings, are the highest sequence of what we now call the Fibonacci, expressions of the Platonic solids, expressions of Schumann resonance, go away Lucifer, expressions of the energy and the divine functions we understand in design and core design dynamic in 1 to 1.6 golden ratio, just understanding the layout of celestial design, sound harmonization, frequency 432 versus electronic man altered 440. Just these things are what's enshrined in our ancestral art, crafts. And when the intellectual analysis is done, when you reach PhD level, and sometimes so disconnected from your family, it's of no use, hallelujah, that you have now learned this knowledge. Now you try to take this knowledge and teach to other people who are not of your generation, who this knowledge is of no interest to, but as an art and a craft. And so your heritage now is carried on by other people who are not generationally through blood, through consanguinity, right? Through estate, right? Through generations and tradition, through custom. They aren't connected to it. So it cannot have the same power or presence, but they'll placate it as modern art. They'll sell it as great design. And the originators languish in the back alleys, reservations, the back quarters of our dark consciousness, in poverty. So traditional podcast sheds light on Aboriginal, on Indigenous, not just as the definitions that we use in denotation or the colloquialisms in connotation, as a way of life for real, as this knowledge of weaving baskets, of weaving tapestry and mats. We need to return to this knowledge, not down the industrial park on the loom. I'm serious. because part of my destiny is to learn to weave on a traditional loom my own fabrics from my own sources, from the plant or the animal fibers to the end product in threads and fabrics, in the textile, the textual, the contextual, the feeling nature of how fabric instills worth and purpose, even a sense of enlightenment. So think about the philosophy, the spirituality you absorb from people who do not share your ancestral traits, generational aspirations, or cultural experience, heritage, or heredity. They are disconnected from you, and you're so clad in your clothing, you so look like them, you so are entrenched in the self-hate that they promote. They promote a denigration of your true heritage, and then they take it and sample it, or appropriate it, that's a popular word, into a design of a particular season, and it will sell millions of pieces, in cheap, fast fashion to a certain demographic, and bespoke pieces to the other demographics. And that's you. That's our heritage. Just being exploited. Hallelujah. And so we're in a generation now where social media is vast with information, not just controversies and philosophies, so you can actually spend some time and recapture some of your generational ancestral knowledge of weaving, of pottery making, of shoemaking, and all these traditions is what I'm studying, right? Of making our own toys, as I've discussed on one of the other podcasts here that you get to have access to pretty soon, right here on Share Life Online Academy, right here on YouTube. These skills of being able to construct garments from old sheets and drapes were a way of survival for not just a lot of people in Jamaica, in Alabama, in the South of America, in Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, in those places, a lot of the women had to sew quilts, especially in the colder regions, to keep their children and themselves warm in winter. And those quilts were sewn from pieces of discarded old clothes that were generational. Those clothes were sometimes, some pieces were maybe like 50 to 100 years old, because they were great grandma and grandpa's old rags that were left. In Jamaica, some of those clothes would become the bedding or the flooring, or especially the bedding material. Some people knew better to cut it up, but some people cut it up into pieces and strips, and they made quilts. And for 100 years they made quilts, and nobody paid notice until some contemporary smart tip hands, Caucasians said, hey, this is art. And all of a sudden you got all his Caucasoid friends in America, European Americans, to recognize just how artistic these Aboriginal Americans that they call slaves, which is not a definition that can be afforded to a person of any ethnic origin, but however, these enslaved Aboriginals that they're misclassified as African Americans, and all manner of misclassification just under the mercantile. Oh, this is art. But it wasn't art for the ladies, it was survival. And so this is where I'm talking about identity. Identity can be stolen, put in a museum, put in a TV commercial, put in a colorway in a shoes, or in a campaign, and it loses its intrinsic traditional value to the people who actually live the culture, not just red, green, and gold in Rasta, right? Because red, green, and gold comes from Ethiopia, right? So some people said Rasta popularized red, green, and gold. Rasta owned red, green, and gold. Well, Ethiopia's flag is red, green, and gold, and that's where Rasta got it from, right? Let's just say that. But that is a slight example. But there are many examples like the Gucci patterns and many patterns that is traditional designs from Aboriginal groups in the so-called nations of Africa, right? And there are many other things in plant medicine that we in the Americas have lost right to. Yeah, a lot of the modifications, the originations of plant medicine is right here in the Americas, right? And the traditional people don't have the patents for these ways of application that has been reverse engineered. So the traditional ways of life has been redefined and kind of captured into a work of art, put into a museum. And so we look at our own in awe and think, wow. But mainly they look at it in awe and say, whoa, or artsy, or artistic. We look at it and our belly hurt. Hallelujah, because it's pain, pure pain. So a lot of the individuals I've recognized in what we call the lower income brackets don't recognize the traditional art. I know they don't recognize the deep science, mathematics, philosophy, astrology, geographics, and all the geography and all those geometric designs within it until they're highly educated within the so-called programmings of the indoctrination system. And sometimes they would have to go through a lot of things to even connect to how deep the knowledge in their ancestors were. And this is unfortunate that this has become a thing that has been popularized amongst us as individuals, that we are looking at even the culture of Black Panther and realizing that is an Aboriginal thing with the priests of the Jaguar right here in the Americas, right? And panthers are Aboriginal to the Americas, not Africa, hallelujah. So just some things in geography that a lot of the birds that they claim are from Africa, Egypt, Africa, are all traditional to the Americas. All of the plants that they say in the Bible represents the plants in the Garden of Eden are traditional to the first lands on the earth that the Adamites walked are here in the Americas, hallelujah. But people will not study these things. Oh, these traditional knowledge is boiling in my head. It has to be made of value, and hence traditional podcast. So the final thing I want to speak about is a form of art that they don't recognize as art that I just like growing up. For most of my brethren, like within the Rastafari community or within certain echelons of Jamaica, you go to their places, and when they're moving from like becoming like a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, having their first girlfriend, they usually have to knock up a little part of the whole family home with probably improperly set up boarding because they would have to do it there themselves. Jamaica is a warmer climate, it's not cold as America, so you don't need fire standards and codes or whatever. Anyhow, usually it will still get cold, so you would have to cover those little spaces in the wall, cracks and other little things in the wood, if it's wood or cement, concrete, whatever, whole houses. And so we take newspaper clippings and newspaper magazines and plaster the walls. And there are people now who recognize that this is a form of art because they recognize, as I know, that we never just plastered it with newspapers just randomly. When I went to all these places and I saw the newspaper creating wallpaper, there was a storyline being told. In the Rastaman, it would be about Selassie and many things on Ethiopia and the color, and that had an influence upon me because that was at my tailor's place, right? And then when I got to that stage, I did the same thing. I plastered my wall in religious iconography. I remember Reverend Moon in Korea had a magazine with his stuff and everything to do with beautiful women, Aboriginal women, scantily clothed. I just thought they looked beautiful. African women. It was most of the theme was religious and women. That was basically hallelujah it. And a lot of stuff later on came about politics. I would have like newspaper clippings about interesting political or cultural events. And so that is now recognized as a form of art. So it is survival. And it taught me humility because it was covering the walls and we didn't have paint or the holes in the old windows, right? That would keep the cold air because we live next to the river. Not exactly next to the river, but close enough that the cold air comes up. So it affects the whole state of harmony. And that was our way through just seeing it being done and doing it ourselves. Art, artistic and creative. And I recently took down a picture, the picture of Age with Color, because I had it up so long, of the last time I lived in a space which was on the veranda. And I covered it floor to ceiling with these clippings. It was the second time because in my other room I did the same thing. And when I moved, I did the same thing. Now I want to put paintings on the wall. What an evolution. Everything else does have to have meaning in our generational dignity, sense of self and identity. The art connects to meaning, value, sense of purpose, and to a rooting of a generation that has always been here. And I do give thanks. This has been Traditional Podcast right here and True Life Online Academy on YouTube. I've been your host, Taloko, the Great Owl, and this is the first in a series of programs that returns us to our natural ancestral pedagogy and way of life. Like, share, and subscribe. Donations will be accepted through PayPal. Blessings, love, and honor.